Wonderful. This certainly makes a difference to filming in breweries every day.
Yeah, I thought you might like a change.
Why have you brought me to this location?
But do you know where you are?
I saw a sign over there, the East India Dock Basin.
Or well read. Yeah, we are in the East India Dock Basin. But I want you to forget, its lost glory.
It's like a nature reserve back there.
Pretty much, yeah. I want you to cast your mind back about 250 years ago, because here was the epicenter of the biggest corporation on Earth.
Okay.
And every day ships would be leaving through this little gateway.
Quite a big gateway, yes.
Quite a big gateway, laden with hundreds of barrels of locally brewed beer.
Go on, I'm interested, you've got me.
I've got you, right. Well, they turn left.
Yep.
Yeah, and then they turn right.
Right.
I'm not going to give you all the directions, but they were headed pretty much to the other side of the world.
Okay.
So I'll ask you again, do you know where you are, Bradley?
Mate, I think I might. This might be the starting point in the journey of IPA.
Exactly. And just over there is a brewery that wants to work with us to reinvent it.
Cool.
Was that all right? Wasn't too hammy or?
No, I think that was nice.
In the 10 years we've been making films about beer, we've made a lot about IPA. We've drunk West Coast IPA on the West Coast, revelling in its bitterness, pine forest aroma and citrus. We've made a documentary about New England IPA in New England, swimming in its heady, juicy dankness. We've sipped at spicy, floral Belgian IPAs in Brussels. We've drunk homebrewed IPA in the Arctic Circle, and even jasmine IPA in Beijing. In fact, at this point, it looks like we'd do anything to not drink it in its homeland. Hell, our homeland. Despite inspiring all of these styles, making arguably the genesis of craft beer, English IPA has been left behind. By us, by brewers, and probably by you. One brewery that's never quite left it behind though, is Meantime. As one of the original British craft breweries, they built their reputation on it, and throughout the 2000s, the iconic bottles of Meantime India Pale Ale were found in pretty much all London's bottle shops. Even they've struggled to maintain drinkers' interest in it though. Today it's a tiny percentage of what they brew, and almost all of it is sent overseas. Increasingly, the lack of love for our own signature beer style, as well as the ingredients that make it, has begun to frustrate me. So when Meantime came to us asking if we wanted to brew a beer together, there was only one style I wanted to make, and I wanted to go big with it. I was acutely aware that it would take some persuasion to get the brewery to agree, but the first job was to convince Brad.
Fantastic, so we're going to be making an IPA, Johnny. This is very, very exciting, mate. Are you thinking West Coast, piney, citrusy, bitter, big, zingy? Are we thinking like East Coast New England IPA, Citra, Mosaic, hazy?
Actually, I was thinking Goldings.
Goldings,
Marisotta.
Okay. English IPA.
Yeah.
Wow,
yeah,
okay.
We're going back to the roots of IPA, is my thinking. It's going to be a big batch of English IPA, which is a risk. But I thought, we talk a lot about classic British brewing on this channel.
We do.
We love, best bitters, porters, imperial stouts, but we don't really talk about our most iconic beer. The one that inspired the American Revolution, the one that changed the world, which is English IPA. Nobody really talks about it. Nobody really drinks it.
Mate, it literally changed everything.
Yeah.
This is the genesis of IPA, the sort of dominant beer style worldwide, the thing that all the hype boys and girls get excited about.
But we've forgotten the original, right? We've forgotten the OG.
Okay.
And I thought this could be a wonderful opportunity with Meantime, who brought IPA brewing pretty much back to London. Other brewers were doing it, but they based their whole business model with this beautiful thing.
Yeah.
If we go to them and we create an English IPA, but not just any English IPA, I'm thinking we could try and make it relevant again.
Oof, okay.
Because the UK increasingly has, incredible modern hop varieties. We've got a vast heritage of English yeast already being used in modern IPAs, and even some heritage malts are available that we used back in the 1800s that could potentially still be great for modern India Pale Ales.
So what you're saying is we look backwards to head forwards into the future.
Exactly that.
Where do we start from here?
If we're going to make an IPA that excites modern drinkers and pays homage to the style's 19th century roots, then we need to learn exactly what those beers would have looked like and tasted like, because I'm fairly certain it won't be anything like a New England Dipper. Now, the history of the IPA told all over the internet is fraught with cliches, inaccuracies and exaggerations. And to cut through it all, there's only one person we trust, venerable beer historian Martin Cornell, otherwise known as Zillophile. We headed up to the beautiful coastal town of Cromer, where after a bit of other important research, we met him at his brother's brewery, Poppyland. I'm going to start with what sounds like a very simple question, but probably has a very complicated answer, which is, what is IPA?
How long have we got? Well, IPA, let's start at the very beginning. IPA was the name eventually given to the beers that were being exported from Britain to India. They were specially prepared to last the journey, which meant that they were more heavily hopped than beers that remained at home. They were not necessarily that much stronger. But it was the hopping that was the secret of the success of these beers, because the hops kept spoilage organisms at bay. But what they didn't do was affect the most important yeast in these beers, which was Brettanomyces. And it was the Brettanomyces yeast that brought these beers into condition on the 4-month journey from Britain to India.
Where were these beers typically being brewed? Where did this sort of pale ale as prepared for India or IPA really originate, or do we not know?
Well, yeah, they started off, there was a guy called Hodgson, and he was the major supplier to the captains of what were called the East India Men, which were the ships that were operated by the East India Company, which had become, certainly by the beginning of the 19th century, a major political player. Not just a trading company, which is what it started off as, but it became a major political player in India, and it had its own army, or armies. It had a huge setup of civil servants. The expression civil servant actually comes from the East India Company. They had their civil servants and their military servants. They had conquered large parts of India. They were raking in huge sums of money in tax and so on and so forth. And they had a large setup of people helping them to run this empire. And they were all homesick. So the East India Company ships' captains used to take out on their own, because the ships were largely going out empty and coming back with all the goods from India. They used to carry out trading on their own and take out all sorts of stuff to sell to the expats in India who were running the East India Company. And this included furniture, clothes, guns, food, cheese, wine and beer. So this chap Hodgson, he had a brewery on the River Lee, just up from Blackwall in London on the Thames, which is where the East India ships docked. So he almost by default became the major supplier of pale ale for India. And this started, you start seeing his name mentioned in newspapers in India in the 1780s. And this carried on until the 1820s. So it was a long time when this guy was pretty much the sole supplier of pale ale to India. And then he got greedy, or his son got greedy, and they decided that rather than sell to the ship's captains, they would ship it out directly on their own bat and get all the money and get all the profits. Well, the East India Company obviously got very grumpy at this, because it was taking away the money that their ship's captains were earning.
Yeah, they've got an army.
Yeah, yeah, but not in this country they don't. So, but anyway, so they then went famously to Samuel Alsop, who was a big brewer in Burton-on-Trent. And the thing that nobody knew at that time was that Burton brewed pale ales are going to be much better than in London brewed pale ales because of the brewing water that they're using. Chalky water in London, great for dark beers, not really that great for very hoppy pale beers. Gypsum, calcium sulfate water in Burton-on-Trent, Wells, terrific for pale beers and for beers that you want that lovely sparkly look through as you stare at the glass, and really hoppy beers. So Allsop and his big rival Mr. Bass rapidly drove Hodgson out of the market and started to dominate the market. So that was the original IPA.
Can we circle back to the special preparation? What was that process?
They were just adding more hops. That was about it, and also probably almost certainly dry hopping. We have evidence that they were dry hopping the beer as well from a shipwreck, when there's a report that they survived by, first of all, they drank all the beer, and then they were sucking on the hops left in the casks. So obviously, we know therefore that they must have been dry hopping. Yeah. These beers.
From all of the research that you've done, how clear a picture do we have of how clear the beer is, what colour the beer is, what flavours we might expect other than the Brettanomyces character?
I think we can be fairly certain. Pale was a description that meant not looking like porter, really. So we could be talking anything from dark amber all the way down to golden. They would certainly be very bitter, and a lot of people didn't like that bitterness. We have complaints of people saying, these far too bitter, these beers, we hate them. Give us our traditional sweet. Which
echoes down the ages as well, doesn't it? This dislike of the bitterness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of what they were using when it was the prime ingredients, the ingredients they wanted, do we know anything about malt varieties, hop varieties, or if not yeast varieties, because they might not have even known exactly what yeast was, but yeast characteristic?
They didn't really think about varieties. It was very much source, terroir, and so they knew that East Kent Goldings, East Kent hops. They didn't even necessarily call them Goldings. They knew East Kent hops were the very best you could get, and also Farnham hops had a very high reputation at that time. And in terms of malt, again, they would tend to use the best sorts of malt varieties. So they would look at something like Chevalier, which was the most popular malt. From the late 1820s, when it was first discovered in Suffolk, rapidly became the premium malting variety in this country.
So it sounds like luck and ambition led perhaps the Burton, well, firstly the London and then the Burton brewers to success, and I think that luck and ambition might have quite a lot to do with how good this beer also turns out. We've now got some information about what we could actually put into this beer, about this recipe that we could form. So it sounds like we need to go visit some hop fields. It sounds like we need to go visit some maltings and go drink some water in Burton. So that was a fascinating chat about the history of IPA.
Never get bored of listening to Martin.
No, a fascinating guy, and actually lots of recipe inspiration there from talking to him and looking through those books. So the first place I want to take us, the first ingredient I want to look at is going to be the hops. Oof. There's no real great reason we should start with the hops, but it is an IPA. And obviously in modern times it's all about the hop aroma.
Hop forward, certainly.
Yeah. The other reason is that although British grain is loved all over the world already, British hops are not necessarily loved around the world, and even in the UK they're not celebrated in the way I think they should be.
They're not old and stuffy, are they, Johnny? There's an incredible amount of exciting stuff going on, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, we've got these wonderful traditional hops that were grown over centuries and bred over centuries to be good for these British styles, but now we have really exciting, super aromatic, American-inspired kind of hops that can give us these modern aromas that we're looking for. So we're going to head to a farm in Herefordshire, just outside of Worcester, actually, to visit a farm that's been crossbreeding and growing these new varieties of hop, ready for these more modern styles that are being made by British breweries. And we're going to talk to them about how these new hops are being created, what they're like to farm, and indeed I think a little bit of the state of British farming, hop farming, because it's not in the best health right now for the very reasons we've talked about, the fact that they're not well loved in these modern beers.
That farm was called The Farm, which didn't really help when Googling it for directions, but eventually we did find it, as well as owner Sarah and Will.
the technical director at Charles Farren, one of the UK's leading hop breeders and distributors.
So Sarah, tell me about the farm. How long have you been farming here and growing hops?
The farm Bosborough has always been a hop farm for over 100 years, and I've become involved for the last 15 years or so.
And how much has what you've been growing changed in that time?
Still have got some traditional varieties such as Goldings and Progress, but we are moving over to the Charles Farren breeding varieties.
So the traditional varieties are Goldings and Fuggles. The acreage has been steadily decreasing. The pandemic hasn't helped that. With generally traditional British hops work very well in cask beer, and sales of cask beer over the last couple of years have been really
zero for several months.
Yeah, absolutely. So the traditional hops have really suffered because of that.
So if I'm right, there's only about 57. Is it 57 British hop farms left?
There's less than that now, 53.
Yeah, 53. So we've lost some since I last did the reading. What was the heyday of British hops like? How far has it fallen, and how do we get it back to where it was?
So in the late 19th century, 1860s approximately, there was 72,000 acres of hops grown in this country. We now have less than 2,000.
Wow.
So the decline has been
a collapse, isn't it? Yeah.
Massive, and it hasn't really slowed. It's still declining fairly quickly.
And that craft beer revolution in the UK hasn't, I guess, really helped, because it's been mostly using American hops, so it's not been helpful here. And you were saying that around here it used to be that
every farm had hops around here, and there was hops all in the Froome Valley as well. So there was hops. All farms had hop kilns and a hop yard.
And they've been torn up and replaced with more profitable hops, or more profitable crops, or
other
easier
crops,
to grow. Right.
Yeah.
Have you ever sat down after a bad harvest and been like, let's just grow rice? Well, probably not rice, but
questioned what we do. Yes, absolutely, yes. But to stop growing hops would be quite a decision to make, because it's in our blood.
Most growers would scale, but we need to they need the market to indicate that the hops are wanted.
Yeah. So in this beer that we're working on, we're definitely going to be using some traditional varieties as part of that link to the 19th century. But what I'm really excited about is trying to get some new, exciting, I guess, American-inspired aromas into these beers, and that's what hops like this can start to offer us, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Those big citrusy fruit notes that don't come from traditional British hops.
So what variety are we stood in at the moment?
We're stood in Onacana.
Hops are dioecious, so there's a male and a female plant. And we took Cascade as the mother, and we crossed it with a hedgerow male that was aphid resistant and showed some really good disease resistance characteristics. And we came up with thousands of seeds, which we planted something like 2,000 of. And from those, we actually got Jester and Olicana from that same cross, so they're true sisters. So from that cross, we got some really big citrus notes, but also in Jester, we get some lovely blackcurrant and rhubarb, you know, other fruit notes.
And very sort of traditional British kind of flavours as well.
Absolutely, there's still a foot in the traditional camp.
Yeah. Which sort of adds an element of terroir to this. It's not just we're going to make hops like America, it's like we're going to have these classic British flavours in there as well. Yeah,
no, we have a unique climate. Nowhere else is trying to commercially grow hops in a climate that is similar to ours. Most other hop growing nations have a similar climate to each other, but we're the only ones with a maritime climate that are trying to grow hops. Even New Zealand has a different climate to us. And it gives us a very unique aroma and flavour profile.
So we're going to be doing a hop rubbing in a bit and learning about the flavours of Olicana, but there's also another hop here that I'm interested in, which is Harlequin. So what's the history of that hop?
So we took Jester, crossed it with some males from that same original cross, and we came up with Godiva. And from Godiva, we bred Harlequin. And Harlequin has an alpha of 10 to 12% and a much higher oil content. and that allows those aromas and flavours to really punch through in the beer, because the alpha in the oil, which gives us those citrusy notes in the oil, are what we're looking for.
Untangling ourselves from the binds, we then headed with Will to Charles Farham's HQ, where he laid out 5 modern UK hops for us to analyse and see if they would fit into our modern IPA. Or as Brad put it,
So it's almost like having a tea bag and having a good sniff of it before you put the water in.
Yeah, I sniff all my tea bags.
Maybe.
Yeah, you got to know it's a good one.
Right? You might be a stale tea bag. We don't want no stale tea bags,
No,
Johnny.
we want the freshest, most delicious hops.
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 Yes.
So, Will, we've seen them in the field. They've now been processed. Tell me about what we've got in front of us.
So we've got a little progression of what's happening in our breeding programme. So we're going to start at Olicana.
What should we be looking for?
We'll give it a really good rub, warm up those oils. But with Olicana in particular, we should be looking for mango, passion fruit, tropical fruit. I mean, I can smell it already from up here.
Yeah.
And there's some really nice floral characteristics as well in there.
Yeah, lovely, soft, fleshy, tropically notes, and yeah, floral as well, like raspberry tea. Like, I'm trying to think of a herbal tea that's reminding me of, but it's got a definite Twinings edge. So what's this next hop?
So this is Jester. So same cross. These are both daughters of Cascade and the same father.
So that is pungent, right? It's got this kind of orange peel citrus kick to it.
It's more punchy, but doesn't have the width of oil profile that Olicana has.
Yeah, less kind of rounded aroma. It's orange peel and kind of some kind of juiciness, but it's definitely, got a kick to it. So what's this one then?
So this is Mystic, which is in fact a daughter of Jester. So there's a bit of a theme here. Jester's a very good parent.
This one smells a bit like walking past a Lush on a high street. It's lovely and floral and soft. Yeah.
Yeah, I get a fresh peppery kind of bang from it, and then there's a blackcurrant milkshake characteristic.
Yeah.
And
it's blackcurrant, isn't it? Yeah.
And then behind that there's tropical fruit coming.
So what's this one?
This one's Godiva.
Okay.
Again, daughter of Jester.
Jess has been busy.
Jester got very busy.
It's a really fresh sort of sharp
It's
kind
fresh and clean. Works very well in dry hop lagers where it is clean, so you can dry hop in a significant quantity and you're not getting off notes. You're getting those tangerine qualities, maybe a little bit of those Nelson Sauvon white grapey fruit notes as well.
Okay, so this is one I've heard a lot about because of its, to use a cliche, a kind of juicy quality. It's something that there's interest in using it for New England IPAs and stuff like that. Is that right?
Absolutely. We're increasing that juiciness with every generation. We're increasing the oil content and the alpha and its ability to punch out of the beer.
It really is that Wrigley's juicy fruit chewing gum kind of thing. You compared it earlier to Mosaic, and I think that's pretty close. It's like that almost overripe fruit thing.
Yeah. I think in the commercial hop world, that's probably the closest hop to it. Yeah, there's peach and passion fruit and all sorts of tropical
it's
stuff.
a really soft, fleshy. You know, where Jester was kind of punchy and citrus peel, this is all about the juice, like the flesh that's inside of these fruits. If you were coming up with a recipe, a pairing of these, where would you start and what sort of quantities would you want to lead with?
I would probably look at either end of the table. And, you know, the modern rules are anywhere between 3 and 30 grams per hectolitre.
So going big, but staying home.
I like it. Johnny, for once in my life, I feel like I know what I'm doing. I feel like we've got the hops down. I feel like that was amazingly informative. Where do we go from there?
Yeah, so now we know roughly the varieties we're going to be using, these amazing modern British varieties.
Yes,
we need to think
exciting.
about, you know, the malt we're gonna have underneath. So we're going to create this layer of flavour to put those hops on top of. So we need to go, I think, find out about the malts that were being used back in the 19th century. So I suggest we head up to Crisp Maltings, a wonderful, wonderful malts. They're world renowned for their beautiful malts, but also super involved in the sort of the bringing back of heritage varieties.
Right.
So these varieties that have historic importance in the history of British and global brewing. And we can learn exactly what malts were being used way back then.
That meant another trip into the middle of nowhere, but this time to meet an old friend of the channel, Dr. Dave Griggs. We first met him on the hunt for the original Pilsner malt, and once again found him lurking by his car parked suspiciously down a country lane. On the other side of the hedgerow, though, was an incredible sight.
So here we are in a field of barley. I've been emailing you guys and chatting about the possible recipe for this beer for a while, and we said we wanted to use a heritage grain. We said we wanted it to be an IPA with a 19th century lilt, and you've brought us here. So what is this place and what are we stood in?
Well, last year we went and saw Hannah,
Yep.
which was our Pilsner heritage barley. This year I brought you to Chevalier. So this is the IPA and the Porter heritage barley.
And so what can you tell me about Chevalier? So we know it's a heritage grain. What does that even mean? And
Right.
where does it come from?
Okay, so Chevalier dates back to the early 1820s. It was a selected barley by the Reverend Dr. Chevalier, who was quite an eminent individual back in the day in Suffolk. So he was a Justice of the Peace, he was a Reverend, he was the sort of typical, you know, did everything kind of Lord of the Manor guy. And he found this barley plant growing in the garden of one of his labourers, thought it was a very fine specimen, took it away, sowed it, and over successive generations, Chevalier really became the dominant barley variety grown in the UK, but also in California, in South Africa, in Australia. Wow. So Chevalier persisted all through the Victorian era into the early 1900s, and it was succeeded by the first deliberately bred variety, so taking two parents to produce offspring from it, and that was the variety Plumage Archer.
So we kind of always imagine the higher they are, the better they are, because it's a romantic thing, them swaying in the wind.
Sting has something to do with that, I think.
Yeah,
but
no,
that's not the case.
That's not the case.
Right.
I mean, the target of breeding these days is to reduce the height of the crop, stiffen the straw so it stands stronger. But the problem that we do have with these older varieties, or the heritage varieties, is too much wind, too much rain, and the crop will fall down, which makes it more difficult.
It's risky
to
to be a farmer of these
It
heritage
is,
varieties.
it is, and it would have been, but it would have been the same that our forebears would have experienced
Yeah.
back in the 1800s. You know, they'd have had good years, they'd have had less good years because of the climate and the changes that they would have themselves would have seen. So,
And so we've got this barley that is tricky to grow, tends to fall over, has had many other varieties come since that have been perhaps more efficient.
Yield's not
better.
great.
Yield's not great.
Yeah.
No.
Why are you bringing it back?
Why did we do it? I said, well, it's a question we've asked ourselves on numerous occasions. So, no, the reason we've run it for, it's an interesting experiment. You know, it goes back to where we started. I mean, we started in Great Ribey in 1870.
So it
would have been Chevalier that was being malted at that time. We've still got the floor maltings from 1870, so we can put a heritage variety onto a heritage maltings and produce a heritage malt from it. But what we did find out in those very first early brews, there was some research work done up at the University of Sunderland at Brew Lab. They were seeing distinct flavour differences coming through from Chevalier, and that's been seen through most of the beers which have been produced from Chevalier malt.
So what kind of flavours sort of differ from the? I guess you're using this to make sort of pale malt in very broad terms.
Yeah.
How would it differ from, say, the more commercially grown varieties?
It's like malty on turbo. Turbocharged maltiness is what seems to come through.
Is that because it's almost like an earlier, wilder form that hasn't been sort of bred? The flavour hasn't been bred out of it.
I think that's exactly the point, Brad. I think where we're seeing now with modern varieties, they've got quite a narrow genetic basis to them. You know, sons of, second cousins of. You know, there's quite a lot of inbreeding in modern varieties. Whereas I don't think Chevalier has certainly not recently been used as a parent within within that breeding programme.
So I guess as you breed and you're looking for resistances to diseases and different things, flavour's not secondary, but you end up with similar varieties as a result of narrowing.
This is exactly it, and there's a lot of interest now in can we breed for flavour.
Well, we've learnt about the variety that I think we're probably going to be using in this recipe, but obviously you don't just use the stuff straight from the field, so I think we should go have a look at the maltings and see the traditional methods and processes that also add to the unique flavours that are going into these amazing varieties.
Escorted by a lorry carrying perhaps the first loads of grain from this year's harvest, we headed to Crisp's main maltings to meet Dan Clark, the production manager and just the man to tell us about the company's historic floor maltings, where they've used the same historic techniques since 1870.
So we've seen the beautiful fields of Chevalier, and now we're at Crisp Maltings. Before we dig into this, can you tell us more generally, Dan, how is barley turned into malt that the brewers use?
Yeah, so all barley is made into malt in a three-step process, so it's steeping, germination and kilning. So steeping is we're trying to hydrate the grain from around about 12-13% moisture up to around about 44 to 46%, so it's ready for the germination stage.
And that germination stage, that's what it would go through in nature to start creating new barley?
It's basically the release of enzymes for the plant to grow, and that's what we're trying to do here. Germination is controlled conditions, so we're germinating throughout controlled conditions to get to a set point that we then pass it on to the kilning to lock in those starch that the brewers need for brewing.
Right, so that drying's locking it in and also creating the different varieties of malt that we talk about in terms of like
creates the different flavour profiles, etc., etc.
Yeah. So we're in front of this field of malts. How is this process different to the sort of the bigger plant that you have next door?
So this process up on the floors is very different in terms of the time it takes to process the malt. So the steeping is, for the heritage grains, is over 3 days, which is more in line with the traditional steeping methods that were used. More modern is 2 days, 48 hours. Germination, depending on the season and the ambient conditions, can be anywhere up to 7 or 8 days, and the kilning itself can be 3 days as well. So very, very different to the standard 2 days, 4-day germination and 2-day kilning. This process cannot be learned. It can't be learned. It's an ongoing process. We're always developing the skills and the techniques that we're using. It's very much hands-on. A modern plant, you can learn to run that in 6 months.
So you say there's a manual for how you make these big commercial batches.
Absolutely, it's written down. It's do this, do that. It's a step-by-step process. This you actually have to work with it, and you have to be led by the product essentially. You can't just say, right, tomorrow do this, do that, because it all depends on what the grain wants you to do.
So I've got to ask, I mean, obviously this seems incredibly labour intensive. Like you're turning over this grain by hand. It's taking significantly longer. Why are you doing that with these heritage grains?
Yeah, so I think the heritage range will give you bolder depths of flavour and colour as well. It's a much softer, it's a much gentler process in terms of the steep, the germination and the kilning, and that all attributes to the flavour. And that's one of the key things that customers and brewers tell us, is that the floor malts offer a very different flavour profile to the more modern.
So we have the hops.
We have the hops in the bag.
We have the malts, somewhere, Maris Otter, Chevalier, something around there.
Some mix
Chevalier being the key one, that was what was used back then.
Love it.
So obviously, the sort of under talked about element of beer has always been the yeast. But many of the yeasts that we use in these beers were key parts of the flavour. Like Martin mentioned, the Brettanomyces yeast, we're probably not going to put that into our beer. There's a lot of challenges involved with using that. But, the classic brewing yeasts, we can still get hold of. All of these yeasts, I'm pleased to say, have been rescued from oblivion. And we can literally dive back into history at an amazing place in Norwich called the National Collection of Yeast Cultures.
Wow. I want to go there, Johnny.
So yeah, I've got no idea what to expect of this place, but it holds over 600 varieties of British yeast in cold storage, frozen storage.
Wow.
And we should be able to dig into all the flavours and all the kind of attributes that these yeasts have with a scientist.
A real life scientist.
A real life one.
Wow, we're going weird science, Johnny.
We're going weird science. So yeah, from there, hopefully we'll be able to pick a yeast that was also used back in the 19th century, but is hopefully going to have some flavours that will really work with the hops and the malts that we're slowly narrowing down.
I love that.
And so we arrived at a business park in Norwich. An unlikely location for a place that quite literally holds some of the most important microbes in history. We were welcomed by the wonderful Carmen, who started by giving Brad, in all his boy-like wonder, a tour of the frozen yeast library.
Contained within these sort of very ordinary looking filing cabinets, you have the history of British brewing, essentially.
Yeah.
Wow.
And if we open, you can see like for each strain, there are existing different vials.
Wow. Okay.
I just want to get one a bit closer so we can look at it. So can you see here is the freeze-dry pellet.
Right.
So these ampoules, for example, that one is from 1987. They undergo a primary drying in which all the water is evaporated and is removed. And the secondary drying, you have to think that inside the ampoule is vacuum also.
Wow.
So between the drying process and the vacuum process allows to preserve strains for very long term. So we are opening ampoules sometimes from the 70s, and you feel that responsibility.
Yeah, so this
of
is
opening,
this is really safeguarding
history.
this for the future,
Yes.
future generations, and this as a sort of vessel is totally kind of in. There's nothing in there.
Preserved.
That's incredible. That's nearly 40 years old. That vial.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're all kind of hand sealed in a lab.
So
are they?
this is a very craft process because you can see the glass exactly needs to be sealed under flame in the lab one by one.
Is there a sort of there isn't an expiry date on this, right? There's sort of way of keeping something.
It's a way of keeping,
Indefinitely.
Although our master stock and the gold standard for storage is what I'm gonna show you next.
Yes.
That is the liquid nitrogen, but each way of preserving has the advantage. And it's very important when you are thinking of storing strains for such a long periods. You have to always have a backup. So
Wow, this is a serious door.
this is the liquid nitrogen tank where the whole collection is, as you see. So it's even smaller than the glass vials.
Right.
You can see the temperature. The temperature at the moment is minus 180. So at the moment you cannot see much because it's all the vapor. But if we do a little bit like that, you will see there are different columns. So it's a way of cataloging the strains. And Maria is going to take a column now for us. So you can see in one column there are 13 different draws. Every strain will have like 6 different straws. So again, like the vials before upstairs, every straw is one replica of the strain.
As long as this stays cold, this is good forever.
Yes.
We managed to drag Brad away before he decided to cryo Han Solo himself to the future and headed to the laboratory that isolates, freezes, and eventually propagates these strains for use by modern brewers. There I got to grill Carmen on the yeast she looks after and pick a few that might work for our beer.
So the NCYC started originally British brewers realized about the potential of the brewing strains, and around the 40s, 50s it was a economic crisis in the UK where many breweries closed down, but we were very lucky that the brewers decided to deposit all these strains somewhere safe.
They're going out of business and going, we need to save the yeast.
Yes, you need to save the yeast because you never know, in years to come, 70 years later.
When 2 YouTubers might go, hey.
Yeah. In the collection at the moment, there are over 4,400 strains. And from those strains, over 600, they are brewing strains. This is a small subset of strains, and you can see the different geographic location origin. These are the strains that we were mentioning before that were deposited around the 40s, 50s, and all, the condition was for the strains to be anonymized, but we can help if someone comes, for example, from the Yorkshire area or Scotland, we can pinpoint some of the strains that originated in that area. So yeah, I'm happy to have open conversations with with brewers. In the past decade, there's been a lot of emphasis in you know, like super hoppy beers and different malt styles, but I think sometimes brewers have forgotten the importance of choosing the right strain, because the strain, every single strain gives a completely different flavor profile.
It feels crazy that so many modern brewers are all using very similar strains and brewing very similar styles when there's a laboratory near Norwich that has over 600 different strains that all have completely different characteristics that they could be using. Feels like there could be in those 600 yeasts some treasure trove that hasn't been used for a long time that we could dig out and bring back to life.
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
So we spoke over email before we came about some potential strains that might have the flavour profiles that we're looking for to go with these wonderful British hops and English malts. What were the two that you suggested?
So we have, basically because you were focused on the London area, as we discussed before, that you can do some kind of selection from depending on the geographic origin. So when you mentioned that you were interested in brewing something from the London area, the two I mentioned to you was 1026. 1026 is probably one of the is quite well used by British brewers, and the other one is NCYC 1318. They were both deposited around the, as we said before, like 40s, 50s.
But were they both used in
sort
of the 18th, 19th
so
century?
They were,
as well?
yeah, they were breweries that originated later on.
So we're looking for that kind of mix of modernity and of history. So these are yeasts that carry lots of flavour with them when they ferment and present in the beer quite strongly?
Yeah, yeah. I think you will get a British ale, you know, profile with strong flavors. I mean, just because you were interested in the London area, but from the small study that we did on flavor profile, we saw some of the strains with higher volatiles and higher flavor profile. Interestingly enough, were the Scottish one. Could be because in the past they have been sharing with whiskey production and whiskey strains.
Which ferment very hot and fast. And
so, I mean, it's just an hypothesis.
Yeah.
But you can see all these are Scottish and northeast strains, and they provide much higher volatile compounds than others.
And are those Scottish strains popular as a result of that, or is it not something that's being used too much?
The thing is, this is something that brewers start to exploit just now. This is not being, you know, those strains exist, and they've been, as we just discussed, they've been deposited with us now for over 70 years. I'm mentioning the Scottish strains because it's quite interesting to see the different...
You've piqued my interest now. I was thinking London, and suddenly I'm like, Scottish yeast, I've heard that's good.
I don't want London anymore.
Once I'd been taken aside and talked out of changing the whole project into reinventing Wee Heavy, we got back in the car and pointed it west once again with one final location in mind, the true home of IPA, Burton-on-Trent. There was a time when this small Midlands town was the world capital of brewing. A model at the National Brewery Centre shows how much of the town was dedicated to breweries and the incredible infrastructure that built up around them. When the British brewing industry went into decline after the Second World War, so did Burton, but those who know beer history still marvel at its influence. Much of that influence is still tasted in the water we use to brew hoppy beer. As Martin Cornell explained earlier, the water drawn from the wells beneath Burton is heavy with gypsum, which accentuates the character and bitterness of hops, as well as helping the beer drop clear. We were there to learn all about it, as well as how it played out in one of Burton's classic beers, Bass. So Des, I think we should start with a bit of a general overview of the history of brewing in Burton, because it seems to go back a hell of a long way and has been so significant.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we became the brewing capital of the world is initially down to an Irish nun by the name of Modwin.
It's not what I expected you to say.
On the 7th century, she was making a pilgrimage to Rome to see the Pope, but for some unknown reason she stopped off here in Burton-on-Trent, and she was the first one to notice the magical quality of the water, and she performed miracles.
What kind of miracles?
She cured people with skin disease, believe
Right.
it or not. When she died, they built a shrine, and on the strength of that, in the year 1007, the band in 18 months came to Burton-on-Trent and built an abbey, and they started brewing beer. And then when Pale Ale came along, which was obviously discovered in London, but it was noticed from about the 1820s onwards that our Pale Ale was more superior because the water here seemed to enhance the quality of the hops. We started brewing Pale Ales, and when the railways arrived in 1839, a lot of the breweries then from the south moved into Burton-on-Trent to make Pale Ale. And because of the railway and the transport links, because we're in the middle of the country, then we became worldwide brewers.
Right, so the water was that good for these new styles of sort of highly hopped pale beers that breweries were literally moving from London to Burton to have that water source.
It was like a kind of, not a gold rush, but you know, like oil towns when someone discovers oil and everyone starts drilling wells. Could you say it was almost like that in Burton as well?
Exactly. I mean, at the turn of the century, 1 in every 4 pints of beer brewed in Great Britain is brewed in Burton-on-Trent. Wow. It's fantastic, it's a small town. Yeah? Later on, Burtonisation came, which meant you could brew wherever you wanted to brew, really.
Right. So that was people recreating the water.
So it's basically down to the quality of the water and our central location for transport.
What is it that this water gives to these beers that's so special?
Okay, we sit on a bed of gypsum, which makes the water quite a lot of sulphur in there. Yeah. And it was discovered from the 1820s, I think it was Allsop's brewery, that the use of our water enhanced the flavour of the hop. So it brought a more pronounced flavouring.
So it's bringing out the bitterness, the spiciness, the floral character of this hop better than like London water, which... Yeah. I mean, that is, believe it or not, the first time I've ever had Bass on cask. I've only ever drunk the...
Should be ashamed of
I am ashamed of myself, yeah. What's remarkable about it is A, how crisp and light it is, but also the lingering bitterness is pretty strong, isn't it?
Pretty pronounced.
So the water that's gone into this beer, this isn't coming from the Trent, or it's not something we could turn the taps on in Burton and drink, or...
No, it's got to come from a well.
Right.
Still have access to the wells. Only the breweries have access to these wells, nobody else. They're very protected.
And those wells, what are they digging into? What is it, groundwater that has filtered through something?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we sit in a bed of gypsum, and the water, I was told a number of years ago, probably the brewing that we're using today to make the beer, probably fell as rain in North Derbyshire when Winston Churchill was a child, and it's passed all the way from the lovely elements of North Derbyshire into our wells in Burton-on-Trent.
So it really feels like if we're going to brew a classic British IPA, if we're not using that Burton water profile, then we're not quite telling the story and paying homage to those original beers. So we're definitely going to do some Burtonisation of our water and get that character in there, along with, of course, the amazing hops that we're going to be using.
So with the snap of a Burtonised IPA, our research road trip was over. It was time to sit down, take stock, and start to formulate our vision of what modern English IPA could be. Obviously, the best place to do that was in a brewery. And after a bit of walking in Birmingham's trendy Digbeth district, we happened to stumble across one that makes great IPA with English hops.
What are we drinking, Johnny? This is quite fantastic.
Yeah, so we came here because they make fantastic IPAs here at Dig, but amazingly, in the tank still, just finishing up carbonation, was a beer made with Olicana.
It's almost as if we planned it.
Serendipity, it's fate.
It is fate.
It's fate. So yeah, we've got this super fresh expression of Olicana along with Mosaic and US Cascade.
Nice.
So we can see what we think is the Olicana in here while we try to work out A, whether we want to use the Olicana,
yes,
and B, what other hops we want to use, what malts we might want to use. Well, cheers, man.
Cheers, mate.
So, I mean, that's blueberry, blackberry, lemon rind, some kind of really tropical fruit in the background. Really complex aroma, really good, really fresh.
And we think that, I mean, like from what we sort of learnt with the sniffing earlier, the hop sniffing, like the Olicana brings a lot of that complexity, right?
Yeah, it brings a huge amount of that kind of, I think that's the background tropical notes. Yeah. And I think it's also possibly that lemon rind citrus kind of character, because I think the Mosaic and the Cascade, you know, Cascade is definitely bringing that berry character, and Mosaic's definitely bringing that berry berry character. So I think that citrus is coming from the Olicana, and I think that's going to be a really nice thing to get in our beer. That's going to, you know, if we could think of something that is as far removed from the cliche of dull English hops, you know, that's lemon rind, orange rind, tropical fruits.
Punch in the face, mate.
So Olicana's got to be in there.
Gotta be.
I think I want a little bit of Jester in there. Not a huge amount, but that beer, that hop was super pungent.
Yeah,
Smelled like nothing else on that table.
The oils in it were really immediate, weren't they? As soon as we sniffed it.
It was kind of dank and like, it actually reminded me a little bit of like Amarillo or Chinook. Those really like sticky, pithy kind of hops that you get in America. So I think a little bit of Jester should be in there. And then I think if we want to bring some juice, that's the modern take on IPA now.
Mini juice.
Exactly. So I think Harlequin's the one for that. Like a big, juicy, round texture kind of hop. So that's the hops. In terms of the malt, I mean, I think there's only really two options. If we want to nod to the 19th century, we've got to put Chevalier in there.
Has to go in.
And we'll get loads of rich flavours from the process, but also from that malt, which was, you know, so perfect for the porters at the time and so perfect for the IPAs. But also, I think it's going to be quite a modern feel. That Chevalier is going to be an unusual flavour to people.
Yeah, certainly out of the wheelhouse of normality.
Exactly. And then, of course, we're going to use the Burton water profile. We're going to enhance the hoppiness, the bitterness, create some complexity with those kind of sulphur compounds that will add a little, what's that?
Yes.
Yeah. So the next stop is the CBC studio, where we're going to process all this
and design this recipe from scratch with everything that we've learned over the last couple of incredible days, and we're going to crown off that day with a couple more Olicana IPAs. Cheers, man.
Cheers, man.
So we've talked a lot about what a historic English IPA is, but what's a modern one going to be? Because it has to be more than just the ingredients that are going in. We've had an incredible adventure seeing the absolute best ingredients that Britain has, and we sat down and dig and picked which of those we want to use, but this beer has to be more than the sum of its parts. We have to come up with a concept which is going to lead to a ballpark recipe that others can follow if they want to start making a more modern, exciting, representative kind of beer of the UK. And the time is now for us to decide what that's going to be. So let's run over what we already know. So we know that this beer is going to have to be all British ingredients for it to be a modern British IPA. That goes almost without saying, and within that we have to include like an expressive English or British ale strain. We have to include all British hops, and I think that within our definition of whatever this style is going to be, it could be, you know, old school English hops, it could be modern British hops with their big juicy aromatic compounds, or it could be a mix of both. Something else I'm really keen for this beer to have to be representative of the UK is for it to be pintable. So we were told that these beers were probably pretty strong back then, and we certainly know that modern IPAs are definitely very strong, but I want this to be pintable. The pint is almost like our national dish, right, at this point, so I think it should be good in the pint format, and I also think it should work on cask. And for that reason, I'd say that these beers need to be no more, I think, than about 5.5%. So that's the vessel we're going to deliver. Those are the kinds of ingredients we're going to use. What are the flavours we're going to try and get out? What are the characteristics of this beer going to be? So I think with that British ale strain, we should be looking for the beer to be really dry. That would be, you know, pretty much in keeping with classic IPAs of the 1800s. I think it should be nice and bitter as well. Maybe not as bitter as, say, a big old West Coaster, because we want to retain that pintability, and maybe not as bitter as it would have been in the 19th century, but certainly assertive 40 to 50 kind of IBUs, so lots and lots of boil hops which can create structure as well. Something I don't think it should have is Brett. while that was a defining part of the 19th century IPA, I think it will make this beer, you know, less interesting, or in fact almost divisive to most beer geeks, and also put off some new people to it. I think that we can have a really clean ferment that can still present loads and loads of that British ale character. So I think that's about it really. We're talking about a beer that's going to be pintable, it's going to be aromatic, it's going to be bittersweet, it's got to have lots of maltiness. I think we also need to include this idea that yes, it's all going to be British malt, but even if it's not a heritage grain, it should be the classic kind of British ale grain. So no wheat, no oats, plenty of, you know, potential caramel, biscuit, or kind of like a honeyed kind of character, stuff like that, stuff that we'd expect in traditional British brewing with those modern hops layered on top. That's what I want, that kind of dichotomy in there, and it's going to be a bit of a challenge making that work as a recipe. So pintable, aromatic, bittersweet, malt forward with big hop aromatics on top. That, I mean, I'm not really sure if it's a style, I'm not sure if it's a sub-style, I'm not even sure if it's basically just liquid wishful thinking, but we've created a blueprint for modern British IPA and where it should be headed. I guess we should probably brew some pilot batches and check that all of this isn't just impossible to do.
And so a plan was hatched for me and the brewers at Meantime to take everything we'd learned from the road trip and each brew a small batch that we'd taste together before settling on a final recipe. As if trying to reinvent IPA wasn't daunting enough, I was now going head to head in a tasting with some professional brewers. So I donned my best brewing jacket and snuck some surprises into mine, including a 30-minute hop stand inspired by New England IPA, some delicious traditional Goldings hops into the boil, and the juiciest yeast that I knew of.
But for now, we've done a lot of talking, let's get brewing. In goes the Chevalier malt, which tasted sweet, fruity almost. Right, so the mash is done. Smash my numbers right there. I'm going to sparge that back to close to the original gravity that I need, which I'm aiming for about 1056. Yeah, and then we'll get the 90-minute boil on. These are my East Kent Goldings. They smell like spicy honey, lemon, bramble. They smell delicious, basically, and quintessentially British, like British spring, which is absolutely what I'm going for here. So we've got an early edition for bitterness, flavour, structure, and a later boil edition, which hopefully give us some aroma, but also keep building on that complexity, like a rounded bitterness, not just like a big spike or indeed nothing at all. And then we'll get on to the aroma hops. So I've got my Olicana, I've got my Harlequin, and I've got my Jester. Right, so the boil is coming to an end, which means I've just started my whirlpool down to 80 degrees, and here is 120 grams of modern British and goddamn aromatic hops. So these are about to go in for a 30-minute hop stand, and then I'll be transferring over to my fermenter and adding the yeast. And that's about it. We'll find out in a couple of weeks what the first iteration is. I'll get to try the version that they made on their grain father over at Meantime as well. And from those two beers, we'll be picking the final recipe and doing the full brew over at Meantime, ready for you all to try. So here we are at the Meantime taproom, and we are here for the first of many pivotal moments in this documentary as we try the first batches of this beer, these trial batches. So I was brewing in my Brudio, and Sven over here, who is designing the recipe with us at Meantime,
Yep.
You did a pilot batch on your Braumeister.
Exactly, yep.
Yeah, so we've got yours on the left,
Yes.
mine on the right. We're going to taste through them. There were some subtle differences. You guys used...
We used Opus.
Yep.
And
along with
used
Olicana and
Jester, yeah.
and Jester, like we did. We put Chevalier in ours.
Yeah, and we
whereas
used Marisotta.
Marisotta, and then you used London Ale 3.
Yep.
which is closer, we think, to the yeast we reckon we're going to end up with, whereas I use Verdant Ale yeast because it's juicy and delicious. So should we start with yours?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Which is this side, right?
Yep, the left side. Quite a bit of orange zest around there, a bit of tangerine aromas as well.
Yeah, really lovely, pithy, orange kind of character.
Yeah, maybe a bit of stone fruit as well, I'd say.
So do you think that's the London Ale 3, the stone fruit?
Yeah, I would say so, and I think the Jester hops has quite a lot to do with that as well. Maybe the Opus is quite similar to that, gives that orange feel to it.
Yeah, it's kind of marmalade-y, I think, Opus. And maybe that's slightly overdone, maybe it's too kind of boozy orange.
Yep.
Wow, it's bitter.
Yeah, it's quite bitter, yeah.
I like it.
I think I'll probably dial it slightly back a bit more and focus a bit more on the hop flavour there. Probably bring up the dry hop a bit more, probably.
Maybe reduce a bit of the Jester and up a bit of the other hops to bring a bit more balance, kind of roundness.
Take some of the orange sort of notes down.
Yeah, take that down and bring up some floral or some juicier kind of character. Well, let's see what we think about this one, because obviously we've got Chevalier, which will give us a different malt character. And then we've got Harlequin, which is a really juicy hop.
Yeah, it's quite fruity, isn't it?
Almost like a mosaic of the UK. So let's see if that helps with that aroma. Okay, so mine is even more bitter than yours. So definitely, I think we need to bring that back. And a little bit earthy as well, which when I was rubbing those hops, I thought that was coming from the Jester.
Right.
But there is a really nice juicy character to it as well.
It seems a bit overpowering, doesn't it, the Jester?
Jester's, it does mask the flavours of other hops as well, so it's quite an overpowering one. We need to maybe just dial it back a bit.
What about, do we want Harlequin or Opus? I feel like Opus and Jester are going to bring similar things.
They're quite similar to each other. I think maybe the Harlequin, like you say, it's quite fruity notes. The floral notes might come through quite nicely. And it'd be nice to give a bit of a tropical feel to a English IPA.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, all agreed?
Yeah.
Right, well, I hope somebody was taking notes of that. If not, we'll watch it back, and we'll be coming up with the final recipe to go to 7,500 bloody litres. Cheers.
Cheers.
Interesting, we all picked the Meantime one.
Thankfully, someone was taking notes, and off the back of that conversation, we went away and came up with a recipe that dropped the bitterness, amped up the Olicana and Harlequin, involves a 19th century yeast that presents suspiciously closely to London Ale 3, and combined our Chevalier malt with some Scottish Golden Promise to make for a truly British IPA. That recipe was then tweaked and scaled up to 7,500 litres by Sven, who kindly invited us down to do all the dirty work on the brew day.
So Bradley, it's been months of planning.
Weeks and weeks of research.
It was an epic road trip through the swaying fields of gold of Norfolk, the luscious green of the hop fields in Herefordshire.
Beautiful.
And a business park in Norwich for the yeast.
Mate, you know what? It was an amazing road trip, and it's all led right here, right now, to the brew day.
Yeah, this is the moment where we can bring the British hop industry into the 21st century while still using amazing heritage yeasts and barleys.
It's celebrating the future, it's looking back at the past with some reverence, and it's bringing it all together, mate.
Well, let's hope we can do it justice as we brew at Meantime. So this is the location, this is where the magic is going to happen. And the mashing is going to happen. Yeah. So this is the biggest brew we've ever done, certainly dwarfs the 20 litres we usually make. Behind us we have where the grain is going to be going in a short while, and then through here is the brew house. So this is the mash tun, this is where we'll combine the grain and the water. Once we've got the sugary liquid we're looking for, it will go into the lauter tun, just the liquid comes across then. And then from there it's transferred here into the boil. This is where we'll be adding the hops, and in something that we've never done before, we'll be adding them into the dosers here. So that's hot. So we're going to throw those hops in, and they'll go in at certain different times. If you follow me down here, we can just about see through this maze of pipework. Just there, that vessel there, that's the whirlpool. That's where we're going to be adding all of the amazing hops that we were getting sensory analysis on with Will back up in Herefordshire, and had that incredible aroma. So hopefully as we're throwing those in, we'll get to rub some of those hops as well and check. They're up to spec, smell delicious, and are really going to make this beer
pop. But before then, we've got to get those grains in, the beautiful Chevalier that we selected from Crisp, so let's go do that. So this is an exciting moment. This is the first indication we're going to have of what this beer is going to taste and look like.
Yeah, right, this is the work.
Yeah, so this is like the unfermented sugary liquid that we produced in the mash, and it's the first runnings of it, so it's about as sweet as it's going to be. It's going to be loaded with sugar. It's very delicious. They call it the brewer's breakfast. Other people might add whiskey to it. We're not doing that today. So yeah, so this is roughly the colour it's going to be.
Liking the colour, mate.
Yeah, it's a nice pale gold. When we add hops, you're obviously adding something that's green. You can change the colour of it depending on how much you add. But yeah, nice light golden colour.
I can smell it from here.
And it smells really biscuity and sweet, like a lot of pale beers would at this point. But lovely honey and biscuity. Feels a bit richer than a lot of the beers that we brew in the studio that are pale, because we're trying to go for lots of malt character here.
Big time,
yeah. So this is the yeast that's come from the NCYC. Feels like not a lot of yeast for an entirely huge batch of beer.
Yes.
See it inflating as we talk. So this is now going to be pitched into like a propagator, like a starter, where they build it up, get it ready and raring.
Get it G'd up, ready to go.
Ready to go. So yeah, this is going to be such a key part of the flavour and a key part of like that historical link we've been looking for, and it comes in a beautifully historical plastic jug. Brilliant.
Feels like it's going to blow.
Yeah, it's pretty close to blowing.
Isn't it amazing that we've propagated this in a lab in Norfolk from a tiny vial of deep frozen yeast.
Spicy. Alrighty. No, wait, we're going this way.
No, wait.
Could have been so smooth. Done. Beer time. Cat party. Godspeed. Oh, cheers, Brad.
Cheers, mate.
A beer well earned.
What a hot day.
They got us doing stuff. I took a gravity reading. What if I took it wrong?
Well, do you know what? We've got to wait some time now, Johnny.
Oh, yeah?
And we'll find out.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so it's going to be about 4 weeks until this beer's ready, and then I've planned a very special place for us to release this beer.
Go on.
No, I'm not going to take it yet. What I was going to say is, if it hits the mark, right?
Yes.
So we need this beer. You know, those test brews that we had a couple of weeks ago, they were pretty good. You know, I'd call mine like a 6 out of 10. Maybe theirs was a 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
We want this to, we need this to be at least a 9.
Right.
You know, this has got to change some minds about British hops. It's got to excite people about heritage malt. It's got to make people want to go to Norwich, you know? So there's a lot that this beer has to convey. So we need that juiciness, we need that rich body, we need that kind of stone fruit thing from the east, and we need it all to sing. So it feels modern, but then you can go, oh, but you know, the grains used in this were first bred in the 1800s. That's a big ask.
So basically you want all of that shared experience we had over our road trip, the amazing people that we met, the knowledge that we've gained, the smells, the flavours that we've tried along the way. We want to condense that down into that brew day that we've just done there.
Yeah, it's not much of an ask, is it?
Do you know what, mate? I think we just might do it.
Well, forever the optimist, Bradley.
Cheers.
Let's see.
Okay, so our beer is literally fermenting in tank as we speak, Johnny, but still, you're dragging me all over town.
I am, because we need to find a place to actually launch this beer. So I've got in contact with the amazing David Jesse Dayson. He's a great writer, he's a historian, and he's an expert on beer and racism.
Right.
And so he's got a great idea of a place that we could launch this beer, where we could have conversations about the ingredients and the processes we've learned about.
And the controversial history of IPA.
Exactly, yeah. So we've spoken to Martin about, you know, how IPA came about, but what we haven't talked about is the impact of all of that, what looks like trade, but actually has a much more controversial past. So we're going to be talking to David at the wonderful Gladstone pub, which is a Desi pub, and we'll learn all about that as we head to Borough. David, thanks for inviting us down to the Gladstone. I guess I should start with the most important question, which is what is a Desi pub?
Okay, so I think the most important part of the meaning of a Desi pub is it has to have a South Indian landlord, and they have to have put their personal imprint onto the pub, whether that be through food, drink or events, which can be things like Bhangra nights or Diwali celebrations. The word Desi is quite interesting because it is a British Indian word, and it means people who are of the South Asian diaspora. So it's not a word you'd use to describe someone who lives in India.
So I guess as a result of a diaspora, you know, those people have ended up in lots of different spaces. So Desi pubs must have quite a lot of diversity within them in what they look like, what they do.
It's really like saying, how do all pubs differ? They offer all very different things. So the traditional Desi pubs offer very interesting foods, that kind of thing. And then you have things like sports bars, which is a big important part of Desi culture, is like watching football, going to the pub. And then you have places which have like Bhangra nights, that kind of thing. And then here in the Gladstone, you've got what I would call is the greatest example of a modern Desi pub. And this is a pub that's really good at having excellent beers, has excellent food, which is very different food, very sort of, they call it Anglo-Indian here. And also is welcoming and very good at bringing all different types of people to the pub, but sort of celebrating British Indian culture. Desi pubs are really a story of struggle. British Indians, particularly in areas of London and Birmingham, would go to a pub and not be allowed to drink. And there was a thing called the colour bar. And this particularly was prominent in Smethwick. And all the pubs were segregated. So you'd go into a pub, you were allowed in the lounge bar, but you weren't allowed in the smoking room. And what happened was there was a big protest about this. This legendary guy who's still alive called Avtar Johal Singh, he worked with a lot of fellow Desis in part of the Indian Workers Association. And what they did was they protested against the colour bar by going in with white people. The white person would order the drink, and when the landlords saw who they were, they would get barred. So when that happened, that would be noted down, and when the magistrate's licensing review came up for the landlord, they'll give evidence, and the landlord would lose his licence. And then it would be taken over by a British Indian landlord, and that landlord would then make it a safe place for Indians, but also would welcome in white people. And so it wasn't like it was their and ours pub, it was really the first case of a group taking collective action to ensure diversity in pubs. What I find quite interesting is that when we're in the Gladstone here, we've got like a very good craft selection, craft lineup, and I'm in a day and it's established, so like sales reps will come in and of all the brands that we know, and it's like if we're sat in the Southampton Arms or the Ivy House. But if I'm sat in a like traditional Desi pub, those people aren't coming in to sell their beers, and I think that that's a big shame, because they really sort of breweries and craft companies that have engaged with the Indian community have seen real loyalty, like Thornbridge and Kirkstall Brewery. They put their beers in where Indian people, British Indians drink, and they really stay loyal to them, even visiting the breweries, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a real missed opportunity.
So we came to you because I wanted to talk about the difficulty and the controversies in the marketing of IPAs, like both modern and historic. I guess, are IPAs being served here? Are sort of the Desi landlords, are they aware of the controversies that might be around it?
I mean, Indian drinkers, British Indian drinkers, they engage with the beers on the same level as any normal drinker would. It's an IPA, it's something on here they would drink, and it's not something they would question. Whereas I'm sort of embedded in the beer industry, being a writer, I like to hold things up to the light and have a look at it. And I do think the way that a lot of products, not just beer, we can look at gin, Bombay Sapphire, that kind of thing, are marketed, and they're marketed in a way that shows empire in terms which are just deeply wrong, you know, like historically inaccurate. And it's really just about this idea of colonial splendour and luxury, which wasn't the experience for Indians at the time. In the 1600s, India accounted for a quarter of all global manufacturing. Wow. And this country was only 3%. And so the real change in Britain's fortunes, and in a literal sense, was when they went over to India. And what happened was they pushed all those artisans out, and they drew the wealth out of the country. So by the 1760s, they were taxing a yearly revenue in Bengal of £315 million in today's money.
Right. So it's just exploitation of all of the wealth that was there. They're just removing and taking to
wealth, treasure, everything.
Yeah.
So buildings were pulled apart, people's possessions were taken, and anyone who got in the way was murdered.
So we've spoken to Martin Cornell, and we understand, you know, these beers were taken over, never given to the Indian people. It was all for the soldiers and for the officer classes that were drinking these beers. But how do we connect that with the modern IPAs that we have today? Because obviously we know it's a very different drink, but is it being marketed as if it has some great, beautiful cultural story, which it definitely doesn't?
The problem is exclusively with the marketing. The idea of colonial times being of luxury, being of decadence, was only really experienced by a few select members of the East India Company and colonising people. And that sort of luxury that we're always given is sort of early 20th century, pre-India independence. We're also guilty of tacitly accepting this marketing in a lot of products. It's not just IPAs, gin, tonic water. It all does this thing that colonial times were this great time of decadence. And my problem with it is that it wasn't decadent for a lot of people, and that decadence was paid for by all the atrocities committed by the East India Company.
So what would you love to see you know, with this project that we're doing, so we're trying to release an IPA, and we would hate for us to be seen to be progressing that issue of this complete, you know, disregard for the actual history of this style. How do we address those?
I think it's pretty impossible to decolonise the IPA with the terms that we're using, because I'm in the process of doing a beer with Villagers Brewery called a decolonised pale ale, and even that is really difficult because people are so used to what an IPA should or shouldn't taste like that if you were to call it something else, it's very difficult. Mm-hmm. But what we should be really careful about is the way that we market it and the way that we portray India. I mean, a lot of craft brewers don't have British Indian workers there, and they're using a sort of version of India which never really existed, and they often will use lettering and symbols which are quite sort of important to Indian people. But I think most of all we need to not cancel IPAs because they're here to stay and they're one of my favourite drinks, but we need to educate people as to the history behind them and the blood and toil that went towards the empire. It's a real chance. We don't teach this in schools. We need to teach it in schools, but us as drinkers can be aware of this. We should be looking to have a situation where British Indians have products and are welcome in pubs and communities, and their histories are celebrated. And there is, although the acts that were committed were really, really shameful, it doesn't make me feel less proud to be British. It makes me feel really, really quite empowered to know that this happened and we're willing to have this narrative and dialogue, and my friends and people I drink beer with share that and they understand my history.
Off the back of our conversation with David, it made so much sense to launch our IPA at a Desi pub. Not just to encourage conversations about these important topics, but to ensure that the beer was being served where British Asian people were more likely to drink it. Welcoming Britain's diverse communities into craft beer is great, but as David said, it's better for everyone if we seek them out too. Most of the beer went into keg, but Meantime also canned a few thousand beers, each wrapped in a design that tells the story of our road trip and everything we'd learned about the history of IPA, the decline of British hops, and the reintroduction of archived malts and yeasts. The cans also bear the name we'd chosen, Now IPA. Why now? Well, partly because British farmers need our support sooner rather than later, but also because we think this beer is a symbol of where British brewing is right now, caught between its past and its future. So what does the Now taste like? Well, a few weeks later it was time to find out, as we invited our friends and beer writing colleagues down to try it. It was also the first time that we were going to try it.
Johnny, we've reached the zenith moment in the film. We've been on this incredible journey together, up and down the country, all across this great nation, tracking down the best ingredients we possibly can, and it's all gone in to this liquid right here.
Yeah, I don't want to drink it, I'm too nervous. Should we do it? Should we get the aroma?
Let's do it. I mean, it smells juicy.
It's pretty juicy.
How does it smell this juicy, Johnny?
I mean, there's the Olicana kind of floral sweetness, like literally like a bouquet, and there's juiciness, there's juicy fruit. It's way juicier than I thought it was going to be. I thought we'd be getting Chevalier. Maybe there's some of the yeast character is there, which we know that can bring some of that juicy character.
Yeah, it can amp up a bit.
Smells super modern. I'm very happy with that aroma.
Dude.
I'm very happy. Come on, man. It's been wild. It's been amazing. To English IPA, to British IPA.
To British IPA.
Pretty bang to brief, really, isn't it?
That is beautiful.
It's dry. There's loads of maltiness, like a lovely, biscuity, grassy, grainy character. There's definitely like hedgerow stuff, like from the big Goldings that we threw in for that link to history. Yes. Works really well with the Chevalier, and then just you're left with kind of caramel and tropical fruits on the finish.
It's kind of an amazing balance, right? And also, it wouldn't be a British IPA without that hedgerow component.
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, it's got an earthiness, but I think we wanted it there. That's why we put the Goldings in. So it is definitely different to, like, say, a New England sort of pale ale or a West Coast pale ale. It's got that classic English hedgerow, fresh grass kind of thing.
Beautiful.
But before we open the doors and let people in to try this beer, if you tasted that, would you consider this a new style, a different style, a twist on the IPA? Have we reinvented anything? Or have we just made a really nice all-English IPA?
I think we've made the case that we should be celebrating English IPA. It's not fussy, it's not old hat. We make some of the best products in the world that go into beer, and this is a perfect showcase for the hops, for the barley, for everything.
So you've heard it from us, but let's hear, I guess, what other beer luminaries think, and indeed what the public think and what our Patreons think about, the first modern British IPA ever brewed.
I'll drink to that.
Cheers. So Pete, thanks for coming down. Before you dig in, I'm gonna ask you a question. How often do you drink English IPA?
Well, not as often as I'd like to. I've got a very specific idea of what a traditional British IPA is, which is rooted somewhere in the mid-19th century.
Right.
And I think you can count on fewer than the fingers of one hand the amount of beers that I think would kind of hit that definition at the moment.
Well, I think you're gonna like half of this beer then. So this is our reinterpretation of English IPA, which we're calling Modern British IPA.
Right.
So it's got Scottish malt, English malt, it's got heritage malt in Chevalier, so literally used in the 19th century, and then Olicana, Jester, Harlequin hops, hopefully bringing some juice and modernity.
Yep, that's everything I was talking about. So I get the hops, that's the first thing I get. And then instead of it just being kind of a one note through the palate to the back of the throat, the malt then kicks in. There's some nice sweetness from the malt. We talked about how Chevalier has a slight fruitiness to it, which with these hops, it just kind of works with that. And I think sometimes we get too stuck up, too hung up on, well, this is the malt character, this is the hop character. The reason there's both in there sometimes is that when they work together, you get something that isn't malt and isn't hops, but is the result of their union.
Yeah.
And that's definitely in there.
Amazing.
And the other nice thing about it is it's got some bitterness at the end. And that bitterness isn't aggressive, it's not assertive, but it's just, you know it's there, and it dries the palate out, and then it's just good. I want another sip of that.
I don't know if you could tell in my face while Pete was speaking, but I have so much respect for you as a beer writer and as a discerning drinker, and it's very exciting.
The relief is palpable.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
So David, it's lovely to have you back. What do you think of the beer?
It's an incredible product, but flavour and taste-wise, it's not really to my palate. I have to say, it's a bit too bitter. What it does is it challenges my view of what tradition is. So for me, like a trad beer is like a best bitter, but you know what, you're like going beyond that. And for me, I don't think my palate is quite ready for that.
I mean, so back as we discussed with Martin Cornell right at the start of this, like back then, making these kind of beers, they were too hoppy, too bitter for a lot of people as well. So it's something that sort of echoes down the ages, and you know, all palates are very different as well. But David, thanks so much for being part of the documentary. Thanks so much for your honest views on the beer. You did say at one point that it went really well with the samosas, though, right?
Yeah, I did say that.
Okay, he did say that. So that's confirmed, and I mean, and ending the interview here. Thank you. Goodbye.
So what do you expect from an English IPA when you're poured one?
What I expect and what I want are sometimes two different things. And to be honest, I can't really remember the last time I had one.
There you go, that's what I'm saying.
Certainly not, you know, on draft in a pub. Probably you expect a fairly standard British hop character from all the old traditional hops. So I'm really interested to see how these new ones from Charles Farren are going to play out. First off, well done, mate. I am impressed. It's got a lovely kind of fruitiness on the nose.
Yep. Are we like modern? Are we like Wrigley's Juicy Fruit Chewing Gum, or are we hedgerow?
Well, there's a bit of hedgerow there, but there's definite kind of tropical fruit going on.
Awesome.
I'm not going to try and pick out individual ones, but there's definitely a kind of a modern fruity character. But there's got especially on the palate, that kind of earthy spice you get from English hop is coming through really nicely and giving it a nice robust bitterness. You know, it's definitely tipped towards the bitter end of it, which is what you expect from an IPA, but it still feels balanced. There's a nice robust malt as well. You get a kind of grainy, grassy malt character edging into biscuity. All in all, that's an easy drinking beer. You could easily get through a few pints of that over an evening.
Now IPA, in our humble and slightly biased opinion, is a triumph. An utterly ahistorical riot of flavour that's still, in its ingredients, rooted way back in the 19th century. So it would be really easy for us to finish this film as we started it. Some slow-mo, some ethereal music, and some claim that we've reignited drinkers' passion for British styles of beer, opened up conversations about beer's role in the empire, and reinvigorated the British hop industry. The truth, though, is that even with Meantime's help, we've barely begun those things. And if we want a sustainable, equitable and diverse beer industry, the time to act is now. Drinkers still aren't half as interested in their malts as they are their hops, and even so, British hop fields are still shrinking and desperately need our support and our passion. The same week we wrapped filming, the National Brewing Centre in Burton was told it would have to close its current site, and its relocation is still up in the air. We all need to make commitments to back our breweries, our farmers and our heritage, and to have frank conversations about how we can atone for the past and build a better future. Ideally, we'll be doing that over a few pints of Modern British IPA.